Hello and welcome back to Marineford TCG. My name is Joe. Drink of the day is Tenzing Peach and Honey Melon, and it's time for the OP13 tier list. Compared to OP12, this tier list is going to look vastly different. OP12 we had like a top 4, top 5, depending on what point in the format you paused. This format, it's not going to be a top 4 or top 5, I can guarantee you that. And I think you can predict what the top of this tier list is going to look like. At least helped by the Zoro tier. So let's go and fill that out straight away. In the BDIFs, it's Emu and Ace. You knew this was coming, and in the second tier, where is he? There he is. It's going to be Zoro. So I do think Zoro is a good bit weaker than these. Zoro has an insane high roll. If you can find that 4-cost Zoro early, especially with protection from Koshiro, your Emu matchup can be absolutely very winning. However, if you don't see this, and this is going to be sort of helped by Emu players having worked out that you really should starve Zoro in the early game, then your game plan becomes a lot more difficult. If Emu is able to enter their late game when they're playing out their 10 costs, with sort of 1 to 2 lives remaining, it's very difficult for Zoro to win the game. You need to see sort of combinations of Koinas and restand events, because Emu is going to kill you in 1 to 2 10 costs. Sometimes they don't even need the second one, because Zoro's defense is quite weak. He does have access to the 6-cost Law, which could be a nice blocker later on to give them sort of 1 extra turn. But the fact that you then have to commit to not attacking with those laws for the whole game, you do lose quite a bit of aggression. Into Ace, I think that is your better matchup of the two, but it can still absolutely be very tricky. You really need to see those restand events in the late game, and they are searchable, but sometimes you just won't see them, or won't see enough of them. Ace has a ridiculous amount of cards, and those 10-12 Whitebeard blockers are actually quite difficult to swing over. So if they're able to sort of safely get to their late game with sort of 1 life left and start developing those Whitebeard blockers, it becomes more difficult as time goes on. Zoro needs to close the game out early. Both these decks currently are doing their best to lengthen the game, so it becomes quite tricky. I do still think Zoro is very good, but I just think he's a good bit weaker than these decks due to some slight consistency problems. Emu and Ace are absolutely the 2 most powerful decks in this format. Which way round you want to put them is personal preference. I personally think Ace is probably a little bit better. As we've seen Ace lists getting more refined, they've actually even started cutting the tax beard, because it turns out just playing out 10-12 blockers, it's good enough. You don't really need the tax beard into Emu. And when you play the tax beard, that did sort of weaken you to the 9-cost Stussy. On that turn where you play the tax beard, Emu player could commit to just going, okay, we're not attacking this turn. We'll sit with what board we've got, and we'll play out Stussy, kill off something, get rid of your Whitebeard blocker. Now you've just got a tax beard. I've still got all my goons. We'll go from there. So the removal of that in favour of more of the red Whitebeard, which can actually make it a little bit awkward for Emu to swing into you, because you'll be at 8k. Or 10k if you use the effect of the Iron Whitebeard event, is quite cool to see. I think this matchup is also just really dice roll dependent. Whoever goes second is going to have a huge advantage, especially if it's Emu. Ace being able to develop 1 Whitebeard blocker or 2 Whitebeard blockers before Emu gets to develop their 10 cost is absolutely huge, because Ace's early game is no doubt better than Emu's. Emu's is just playing blockers. Maybe you'll play Marcus Mars to blow up whatever Ace did. But Ace is very much on the front foot at the start of the game. Their Marco blocker is better than Warcury. Their 5-cost Yamato gives them crazy card advantage, and you obviously don't have Pudding to punish that. So I do personally think Ace is a little bit better overall, and also much easier to pilot at a high level. Emu has a lot more options that are very, very important, and however, he's still very, very powerful as well. Both of these are the top 2 by quite some way, and I do think Zoro is third. Next up in the very good tier, we've got a couple of decks. First, I want to actually talk about Lim, because I think this is underrated. I think it's been very underrated in the East. Not really sure why. Maybe I'm coping. Maybe it's just format inexperience. But ramping to 9-cost Zoro and 10-cost Shanks from the new OP13 set seems really good. Lim benefits a lot from being a deck that wants to go first, or at least traditionally does. I do actually still think you take second into these decks, which is quite funny. But traditionally, Lim absolutely loves going first. You get to play a 5-cost on 3 and ramp, which is crazy. And having that early aggression into Emu, for example, is really, really beneficial. By the time that they get to play their Marcus Mars, you're going to have ideally 3 characters on the board maybe even 3 5 costs with that new 5 cost Sanji from OP13, which means that their Marcus Mars just doesn't just destroy your board, you still get a couple to keep. And after that, you can transition to either playing 9 cost Zoro, which if not dealt with, is just game winning into both of these decks, or just going a more consistent route with the 10 cost Shanks into using your leader effect to play out something else, and using the rest of your Dons for aggression. 9 cost Zoro combined with, for example, Dead Man's Game, or playing out 10 cost Shanks and then using all of those Dons to swing, is really powerful into both Ace and Emu, of course. The one problem you can face with that card is if Ace is able to red rocket, it becomes a little bit more tricky, because then you may not have another one because it is unsearchable. And also, playing it does take up your entire turn, whereas Ace still gets to do things with the rest of his Dons. So I think into Ace, often going for a more mid-range approach with more of your Odyssey characters and the 10 cost Shanks is more beneficial. Whereas into Emu, I do find the Zoro more consistently good. Lim, of course, also has access to Dead Man's Game to rest those blockers at the end of the game, which, when combined with a big board of Odyssey dudes, or 9 cost Zoro, is absolutely devastating. And in addition to that, you have some really cool counter events. Judgment of Hell can be useful into both Zoro and Emu. Emu loves swinging 7, or Judgment of Hell gets you out 2 7s. And Zoro, of course, doesn't love the power down with his leader. And into Ace, you actually have access to the Nora Nora Beam Sword, which can be pretty cool for countering out of a swing, and then resting that Whitebeard blocker to give you more aggression on the next turn. Because they want to swing after they play their Whitebeard blocker to get the value out of those Dons that it provides, the Nora Nora Beam Sword is really good into them in a similar way to Bonnie's leader effect. So that's actually something pretty cool that Lim has access to. I do think the Zoro matchup is bad. The fact that if you don't see your 1 cost Lim, you're kind of just cooked. They can just swing into you without even needing Tashigi is tough. And we don't really have good removal for a card like Tashigi outside of the 6 cost Sakazuki, who is then not very good into Ace or Emu. So that's a little bit tricky too. I do think Zoro is one you're going to hope to dodge, but if you can just see Aces and Emus, I think you actually do pretty well with Lim. I have high hopes for it, but maybe I'm coping. Also very good, I think, is Roger. And Roger obviously gets a little bit of a buff in about a month or so when we get that Roger promo, just making him more consistent because it's searchable over the 9 cost Newgate, and also it's just slightly better, costing 8 instead of 9. Spamming 9k leader and also playing up the 10 cost Shanks are both very effective into these top decks. Typically into Ace, you're going to get to play a big guy before they get to play their Whitebeard, which means that when you play your second big guy, if it is a rush unit like Roger or Shanks, then they've got to carefully consider when they want to block with their Whitebeard so that it doesn't get blown up. Into Emu, again, you're able to play big guys earlier than them. And the 10 cost Shanks in particular in this matchup is really, really important to reduce the power of their characters down from 7 to 6, and ideally from 6 to 5 if you can stack 2 of them. Reducing aggression is what this leader is all about, either by going big or reducing their power with 10 cost Shanks. And if you can do that, if you can find your ramp and play out those guys, the deck's really, really good. However, if you whiff your ramp or whiff your top end, the deck's really, really bad. So it creates this weird situation where this is kind of a high rolly deck, but it is fairly consistent in what it's doing. It's not like a giga high roll, you know. You have a lot of redundancy in the ramp and also in your top end. It's just really, really good when you see the specific top end and ramp that you need for the matchup. So for that reason, I can't put Roger any higher than very good. But his power is there, but the consistency is just a little lacking. Finally, in the very good tier, I've got Sabo. I think once we get that McDonald's promo Sabo in December, it makes his early game just much better. His over-reliance, though, on both going second and the 6 cost Sabo are 2 things that really scare me for this deck. His power is really crazy, but when you don't see the 6 cost Sabo, the deck feels like cheeks, and his going first curve is just plain bad. Like, Ace, at least when he's going first, has some stuff he can do, right? You can do Jozu and then put it on your leader. You can do Marco and put it on your leader. So you gain some sort of advantage over the second curve in that you can keep putting Dons on your leader whilst playing out your good plays. Emu has some cute plays, like they can play Jupiter early, or on 7 they can play multiple 4 costs. And However, Sabo on 7, he's just like got an extra Dom for Researcher. It's fine, but it's really not great, and it means that you're just a turn behind these top decks. However, when he goes second, and when he does see 6-cost Sabo on curve into either the Red Dragon or the Black Dragon, that's really good. And he does have some unique selling points in that late game in both the Stussy and the Roger, being searchable off the 1-cost Garp. Stussy, really good for dealing with your 10-cost Whitebeards. Roger, really good for dealing with just these guys' blockers at the end of the game. And the fact they're both searchable off Garp is a cool, unique selling point for Sabo. I think the deck is inherently powerful. He just really needs something to do on the odd curve. Either on 5 or 7. Just give him something different to do. And God forbid you don't see 6-cost Sabo, because you just cooked. Next up, I've got this tier, which is loses to Emu or Ace. These are decks that I think are inherently good, but just lose to one of the top 2. So I personally wouldn't consider playing them for a regional. However, if you know your local meta is very Emu heavy or very Ace heavy, and nobody's really on the other one, these are actually decks that you could take to surprise a lot of opponents. And I'll start off with Bonnie. I think Bonnie is likely the best in this tier. She has a very good Ace matchup. Cards like the Law and Beppo and the 10-cost Doffy, and also the 9-cost Shanks are really good for dealing with Ace's Whitebeards. However, those cards don't do a whole lot into Emu. And the Emu matchup is pretty tricky. There are builds of Bonnie that can deal with Emu, focusing more on cards like 9-cost Zoro. But those builds then struggle with Ace, so you're kind of hedging your bets, right? Bonnie did win CS over in Japan, which is very impressive. I believe they only played one Emu, though, throughout the whole tournament, so bear that in mind. Deck's definitely powerful. I just think the Emu matchup is quite tough, because Bonnie struggles into decks that go wide, and my god, does Emu go wide. But if you can dodge Emu, if you're not expecting too much Emu, Bonnie, I think, is a great pick. In the opposite way, I want to talk about Purple Luffy. Purple Luffy is quite good into Emu. You have cards like Magellan, which are great, and just ramping to big things like Katakuri, 9-cost Luffy. 7-cost Sanji, being able to rest both of those blockers, both Walkery and Mars, is quite cool. However, just we don't talk about Ace. Because you draw extra cards from your life, you are giga weak to Pudding. And look, it's one of the worst things about this matchup, is you just kind of die to Pudding. Also, your ramp advantage is sort of matched by them in that Whitebeard event, being able to play out the 10-cost blocker. If it's effectively a turn early with the event, it's like they ramped too. So you still lose half your advantage in that matchup. But yeah, really the biggest thing is Pudding. You just get Pudding from like a 9-card hand in every match, it feels. Which is kind of crazy. You also naturally have not much way to punish them for just sort of taking and then sitting behind blockers. We don't have access to a good unblockable in this deck. We don't have too much hand scam outside of the 4-cost Law, who is a useful piece, but he's not too crazy. So I do personally think that if you're expecting a lot of Emu, you play Purple Luffy. Magellan's great. You stop them using their 10-cost. You play big guys. It's pretty good. However, if you're expecting a lot of Ace, I'd leave this guy on the shelf. The Rayleigh and Zoro, I think I'm going to put Zoro in Cope because you're better off just playing Rayleigh. Like, the deck's just better. In my opinion, it's much more consistent because you have so much ridiculous search. Whereas the Zoro has less search and he's very reliant on seeing that chopper still. But both of these decks kind of do alright into Emu. Not super great, but alright for sure. They're aggressive, and if Emu does whiff things early, aggression can be a really good route. But Ace has so many resources, so many blockers, and being at 6k naturally means that it's harder to attack with your small characters, which means that Ace gets more value out of his blockers, and this Ace matchup is just pretty tricky in general for these more aggressive decks. Jozu as well is just kind of frustrating, takes away a lot of your aggression. And Marco being a draw 3, it's silly, man. It's really, really silly. I think these decks can definitely compete, especially Rayleigh. I think Zoro is solidly a Cope deck. But I would not be surprised to see some Rayleigh tops in this format, especially if you can just dodge too much Ace. Because your matchup is the Emu, and even into Zoro, really aren't that bad. Should probably talk about UP next. And if we're including the Roger promo, I would put him in very good. If we're not including the Roger promo, I would put him in loses to Emu or Ace, because I think without that promo, you do lose to Emu. Into Ace, you develop big guys before them, you develop multiple big guys. It's somewhat similar to Roger, but you also have access to Red Rock and Pudding, which both just... Ace hates those cards, man. He wants a big hand, he wants to play big guys. If you can do a Sanji combo for their first Whitebeard, and then go, okay, Red Rock Pudding, like, they pretty much just lose on the spot. It's really rough. It's not quite that bad, but it is really, really rough for them. However, without that 8-cost Roger, you're just getting killed by Emu. You can ramp and play out some big guys, but once they get to their 10 costs, they're swinging a ridiculous amount of attacks into you. And in the previous set, we'd be playing the Rosie to use extra events to have even more counter, but you can't do that this set because they just blow out with Mars. So even the Rosie to give you extra counter doesn't really help because you're forced into playing these 9 costs, otherwise you're just never going to break through. So I do think that's a bit tricky. Once we get the 8 cost Roger, this matchup gets a lot better though, because you go to 8, which means to even get 1 card out of you, they've got to put a Don on each of their guys. And if they're putting Dons on their guys, they're not holding Dons for events, which means you're going to have an easier time pushing through. So I do think once we get that Roger promo, he'll be very good. For now, I'd put him in the losers to Emu Ace tier, probably above Rayleigh, because I think he has a better matchup into Emu than Rayleigh does into Ace. In fact, maybe Purple Luffy's too high. Maybe we'll go something like this for now. But yeah, once we get that promo, he's probably either just below Roger or just below Lim for me, something like that. I'm going to put Sakazuki in Cope. This deck has a very, very playable matchup into Ace. Your bot deck cards, so they don't get the leader effect when you remove their stuff. He stinks into removal. He has no anti-removal at all, which is brilliant. Doesn't even really have a great way to deal with Rebecca. Rebecca spam outside of Roger very, very late in the game. So I think if all you were expecting is Ace, great. However, you instantly fold to Emu and you pretty much fold to Zoro. We were already struggling to deal with this deck last set, so this is very, very bottom of Cope. But if you were going into a format where you know it was a very small amount of players and they were all playing Ace, then I actually think Sakazuki, low-key not that bad. Low-key not that bad. He's also pretty reasonable with some of the lower stuff, things like Roger. You can absolutely deal with 1 card a turn. You just can't deal with unremovable cards or Zoro. So I'll put him here as a note for that. And you could interchange this with Lucci if you like, although I do think Sakazuki's better into Ace because of the bot decking. Blackbeard, I'm going to put in this losers to Emu Ace tier. If you want to be Emu, you have to go Turbo Burgess. If you want to be Ace, you want to go removal. So you've got the two sort of identities of the deck are clashing. One beats one deck, one beats the other. You can't really play both consistently because of deck space. So you've got to kind of pick your battles or hedge your bets somewhere in the middle and hope that you can get there. Which can make it a little bit tough. Also, Zoro very much exists, and Zoro is just pretty good into you. Generally, especially if they see those events, it can be very, very difficult to deal with Zoro's Blackbeard. As we found out in the past, in the past set, they were playing some copies of the Black Vortex counter event. However, then that's more spaces than not going to either your Burgess game plan or your removal game plan. Again, weakening your matchup into these two. Doffy, I think, is Cope. It's just kind of bad aggro. He's better than Sakazuki. I'd probably put him with Zoro. These guys are kind of doing the same thing, right? They go pretty wide. Doffy cheats out extra cards, which is good. And it is worth noting that having access to both Pudding and Red Rock is great into Ace. However, you don't have enough aggression to deal with Emu, in my opinion. Perfume Theme is cool. Perfume Theme is very cool, but sometimes they can just defend like a 17 because of the counter events at the end of the game. And your sort of resistance to them going, okay, 7 later on is not great. If we had Jinbei, I think this could low-key be quite a lot higher. But with that card still banned, I don't think you have enough aggression to Emu. And Ace being a 6k leader can still be quite annoying sometimes. GP Luffy, I'm going to put in here, sort of near the bottom. I think once we get the Robin promo from the Woman Tins, this will be worth revisiting, because it will give you a little bit more reliable anti-removal. But currently, because Marcus Mars hits base 5, your Pudding's just gone. Your Sanji Pudding is just gone, which makes this Emu matchup quite unplayable, as long as they see their Marcus Mars. Of course, Giant's still good. He still has good tools. DMG is still really good for dealing with these. And did gain a couple of new things from the new set. The 5-cost Sanji, I think, is maybe worth experimentation. but more so the 6-cost Secret Luffy is also pretty good. Just giving you 4 Don back can make some pretty silly board states, and that card can help with Marcus Mars because it's 6-cost. However, just losing your Sanji puddings constantly is really just not ideal into Emu. Into Ace, I think it's a little bit better, but it still can be tricky with how much counter Ace is able to accumulate through those extra draws. And if you do, for example, with the boats, they can still just bounce your Sanji pudding with the Jozu. And those 10-12 Whitebeard blockers, they absorb a lot of pressure. Although I do think Ace is a much better matchup for you than Emu in my testing so far. I think most of the rest of these decks will be going in Cope. I think Vegapunk just kind of struggles. Against good players, they'll just starve you. They're not going to give you extra triggers. You're obviously not getting aggroed down by these. Zoro matchup's low-key not too bad, but these top two, Emu, again, having that Mars and having a lot of blockers that you don't have good ways to deal with, it means that you're not going to be able to aggress them down very quickly, especially because your leader obviously can't attack. And into Ace, Jozu is pretty annoying, Marco is pretty annoying in the same way as Walkuri. And even once you get them to 0, actually killing them is a different story. They have the Whitebeard to go to 8k. Taxbeard is low-key really annoying if they're still playing this, because you don't have the cards to trash. So even if you would have a lethal, sometimes you just can't pay the tax. You're bankrupt with Vegapunk. So I do think Ace is a really difficult matchup for him. And Emu is not great either. So whilst he did gain some cool new tools with like the 9-cost Bonnie and 7-cost Stussy, I still think he's just Cope this format. I don't think you really beat these anywhere like reliably. Bonnie, I think, is the better of the yellow decks. I'd put her in here. I'm not really confident in saying that, yeah, this matchup stinks or this matchup stinks. I just think generally she's a little bit weak. So maybe Cope is right, but Loki, you do have some decent options into these. Spamming Basil Hawkins is great into Emu because they can't deal with it or they're going to trash their life. And the Rush Bonnie is actually quite good into Ace, along with, again, life trash effects to remove their life whilst not giving them extra resources from their leader effect. And then into Zoro, you've got the 5-cost Boa, who's pretty good at just stunning their leader to remove their aggression. But the deck's issues are, these plays are good, but they're not like that good. They're not crazy. Her power level is just a little bit too low, in my opinion. And the leader effect is also just not that good. Like, 2 Rested Dons is fine. Don't get me wrong, it's pretty good. But it's not that good. So I do find that Bonnie struggles a little bit. I'd maybe put her above here because her issue isn't like a matchup. It's just the power level of the deck. With more support, I would not be surprised to see this deck rise up. And we are getting that Egghead Luffy deck. So I think don't sleep on Bonnie. She's not that bad. But she's also not up here. Definitely not. Not too many left. Belo Betty, I actually have not played Belo Betty yet. I've played into a couple with Roger, and it felt pretty good for Roger. Just because Belo Betty just dies really fast. I think into Emu, from the matchmaking data I've seen, it's just a dice roll. Belo Betty going second beats Emu. Belo Betty going first loses to Emu. I can see your Ace matchup being a little bit better, because 8 into 6 is obviously a very good number. And you do have ways to remove some of their early plays. However, if they just get second, I think you're still probably cooked. So I'm going to put Belo Betty in Cope. I'll put her up here, though, right at the top of Cope. I think if you come in dice rolls, Belo Betty's still pretty good into these two. But if you're stuck going first, your curve stinks, and they're just going to be able to remove a lot of what you play. Either by Jozu or Mars. Also, Zoro sucks. This matchup is why Belo Betty was not playable last set. And it's still going to be one that you have to dodge Zoro. So I think she has her issues, but can just beat these decks down sometimes. Sanji, I think, is a little overrated by some people. The deck's good, right? The power level is good, and the extra aggression into these decks is good. But you are weak to removal. If you don't see your Koshiro, your guys everything's just getting blown up by Mars and Jozu. And you're also weak to inconsistency. You need to see a lot early on. You need to see those attackers fast. You also need to see good 2 costs. So personally for me, this is a very top of Cope deck. I think between the consistency issues and the fact that if you end up on a bad curve, if you end up going first and you don't see the Mihawk, the 2k Mihawk and something to play off it, I don't see a way to beat these. Because you're going to play out maybe a Cavendish or like a Smoker on 5. And then Ace blows it up with Jozu, Emu blows it up with Mars, and you don't have any aggression. So personally, I think this deck is just too high reliant, or reliant on your opponent low rolling. And also I find the Zoro matchup really difficult for this deck. So for me, this is top of cope. I've seen a lot of people putting it a bit higher, but I've just not found that in my testing. These bottom decks are ones that I have less experience with so far in this format. However, I still think are worth talking about. Kids managed to top a Chinois Cup. Really don't understand how. Don't understand how. Like, you're not doing enough into Emu to survive the barrage of 10 costs. And, I don't know, I feel like Ace will just bounce your Hawkins. And then, just Whitebeard blocker. How do you get through the Whitebeard blocker? I don't know. I'm putting this in cope just to like acknowledge that this topped a Chinois Cup. But I don't know how. I need to test this one. But clearly it has something in this format if they can top the cup. Despite it being overwhelmingly Ace and Emu. Kuzan and Loki think could have something in this format. The main issue though is, again, it's a deck that wants to go second. And I generally think decks that can happily go first are going to be much better in this deck to answer these. Things like Lim and Purple Luffy. Whereas Kuzan, if you go first, you just cooked. You're not beating these going first. But if you go second and you can develop a big board of 8Ks before Emu gets to their 10 cost, that's great. And 8K is obviously very good into Ace as well. The Kuzan freezing their guy too is pretty strong. If you can freeze, I don't know, like the 5-cost Yamato, get out of a bit of aggression that way. That's pretty cool. So I'd probably give Kuzan around here too, around the top of cope, until I test him and find if he's better. But I think there could be something here. Just playing this as aggressively as possible and having access to Pudding and Red Rock for the Ace matchup seem pretty compelling. Final few, Pudding's just a ramp to 10-mum deck now, I think. Your Katakuris can't swing over Ace's Whitebeards, and they'll just be weakened by Nosturo, so you're not going to get the block value. 10-mum, pretty good into Ace, especially if you can ramp to it before they can play Whitebeard, because even if they Red Rock it, just play another one. It's not like the 9-cost Zoro and Lim, where they Red Rock it and you're like, ah, no, I did nothing. Because 10-mum already gave you a heal and a trash. Like, it's pretty good. However, I think the issue, again, with this matchup is going to be winning. They can play their 10-cost Whitebeard blockers, and once you get them to 0, they can start playing Red Rocks on your 10-mums, start cleaning up the board. You're going to lose your aggression. They've got crazy defense. We don't have Dead Man's Game or anything like that, or even anything to punish them from having a big hand. So I think for that reason... the fact that I just don't think it's that great into Emu, I think I'll put her in cope as well. We'll put her around the same level of these goons. Buggy is one I want to test. Buggy is one I want to test because you've got Red Rock on a 5-cost 12k. That's pretty good into Ace. Also having access to Pudding seems pretty good into Ace. I could absolutely see this deck being decent into Ace. My concern is, can you beat Emu? And you probably can't beat Zoro. So for that reason, I guess it's in a similar place to Sakazuki for now, until I test it. I think you should have a better matchup into Emu than Saka for sure, because you can be pretty aggressive. But your Zoro matchup is still rough. It's why we don't see much Buggy in OP12. Is a good bit of that is because of Zoro. But again, if you are expecting a lot of Ace, I'd actually be interested to see how this does. I probably will have a Buggy video on the channel soon, if I can make it work. If. It's a big if. Final 3, Yamato, I'm going to put, I think, most of these in cope. I think Yamato has some stuff she can do. You have good aggression. Hawkins is good into Emu because they don't want to kill it. Having access to Dead Man's Game, it's great into both of these. Double attack is also good into Emu, especially if you can get a banished double attack off on them. I think you could be in a really good spot. However, the issue is that's easier said than done, right? They have a lot of blockers. They have a lot of counter events, which they're very happy to use early. So I think actually getting a banished double attack off on Emu is going to be a lot easier said than done. However, Yamato is a deck that is quite happy to go first, either with some kind of Mihawk combo into like a Hawkins, or just swinging 8 double attack. Even if that 8 double attack goes through, it's pretty good. However, Emu can have the event to counter that, which is not great. I think Ace is going to be a lot trickier. They have bounce, which is more annoying for Yamato because you don't get any of the annoying on KOs. And whilst you can rest those Whitebeards in the end game with Dead Man's Game or Hody, the amount of cards Ace is going to have in his hand by that point, I think it's just going to be too hard to overcome. Double attack into a 3-life leader is really weird because it's kind of the same as double attack into a 4-life leader. But Ace is 6k, so he has an easier time defending. And he also gets extra cards, so I'm not sold on this leader being good into Ace, or Emu particularly, but I think it could be at least decent into both. And that's why I've put Yamato in Cope tier and not on the tier list. Blue Yellow Nami, I think I'd actually put at the bottom of this, more so because of the definition, right? I think Blue Yellow Nami's actually could be okay into Ace. Again, you have Pudding, you have Red Rock. That's a pretty good start. You also have some pretty nice early game plays, things like the Kuma, very strong. Being reasonably sized guys that give you good effect is great. You do also still have the option of Odin, which could be pretty cool into both of these for some extra aggression. However, I think why Nami is here and not any higher is the Emu matchup feels pretty unwinnable from what I've played so far. You go to 7, and what number does Emu swing? Shocker, it's 7. Incredible work. Emu just naturally swings a lot of 7s, so that means you get a lot less value out of your leader effect because you're still going to give 1 card every time. Maybe there's some room to play something like White Snake to go to 8. Maybe we could try a bit of White Snake action for the Emu matchup, but I still think it's going to be tough, right? You don't have a board, typically. You rely on dealing with your opponent's board with things like Nojiko and Zeus to remove their early game plays. Those just don't work into Emu. Removal in general doesn't work into Emu. And that is a large part of Nami's identity, is going, okay, Nojiko Pudding. Ha 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 ha. You lost your board, you lost your cards. What a joke. But into Emu, again, that just doesn't work. So you're not going to be able to outgo them down. And I don't think you're really surviving the 10 elders. The 10 elders, yeah. Feels like there's about 10 of them. I don't think you're surviving the 10 elders reliably at all. So for that reason, I've got her in the losers to Emu or Ace tier. I just don't see a way to beat Emu reliably. However, I think you could have a reasonable matchup into Ace. And your Zoro matchup, it's not that bad. It's certainly winnable. Finally, Red-Green Luffy. I'm going to put this in Cope, near the top of Cope. His leader effect is crazy. The amount of value you get out of this leader effect is like bonkers, man. You can regularly get sort of 4 2Ks worth of value, which is like, it's like drawing 4 cards. It's ridiculous. However, his cards just aren't good enough. Like, the 5-cost Sanji, it's brilliant. But it gets removed by both of these on curve, which is tough. And this sort of forces you into this playstyle of 9-cost Zoro plus unblockable, which has its merits. It absolutely has its merits. But because you don't have ramp like Lim does, into Ace particularly, they have no qualms in just playing that Red Rock on that 9-cost Zoro the turn after you play it. Which really just sucks. It just sucks. They're going to have 1 Whitebeard blocker down already, and the extra aggression they get from those Dons will offset sort of your leader effect's advantage somewhat, and then just being able to Red Rock your Zoro means it's going to be really hard, makes it really hard to get through them. Into Emu, it's not so bad, but you do have to watch out for Stussy, of course. And if they can defend up enough early to get to their end game with sort of 2 life left, they don't even necessarily die to like 1 big 9-cost Zoro, which means you've got to go smaller with him to keep Dons up for your leader effects so that you don't die, and then they can just counter with events, so maybe they don't even lose any lives. It becomes sort of a difficult back and forth. I don't think this deck really has the power in its early game to reliably get these decks in a position where 9-cost Zoro just wins, but it does have inherent strength in that leader effect and the option of 9-cost Zoro when it does work. Overall, this is my tier list. I don't think this is too controversial. I think the biggest differences you'll see on mine from others is I think Lim is really good. I think this deck is very slept on at the minute. And I also think decks like Purple Luffy just aren't as good as people are making them out to be. Like, you can beat Emu. Absolutely, you can beat Emu. But Ace is tough. Zoro is tough. I don't think this deck is actually that strong in this format, personally. But we'll see. It'll be exciting to see if any rogue decks do rise in the West. Because, as you know, we love rogue decks way more than the East does. So I'm interested to see how this plays out for us. But regardless, Thank you for watching. Let me know where you disagree. Let me know which decks you think should be in at least Cope that I didn't include. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your day.